Palm Sunday. I've got a quote on the screen behind me from the Gospel according to John. And I'll talk about that. There's a lot of misreading in that line. And I'd like to go back to the Aramaic and discuss some of those words with you. But I'd like to begin with another verse from John. This one's in chapter 12, verse 46. Because there's some misreading or mistranslating that's gone on with this verse as well. John 12:46 reads, I have come into the world as the light, so that whoever believes in me may not remain in the darkness. Daily Word says, I have come as light into the world, so that everyone who believes in me should not remain in the darkness. Very similar. But this word believe, believing in me. As I grew up in the Methodist church in Sunday school, I was taught that I had to believe in a certain thing. And that if I didn't do this and follow it correctly, that I would be in trouble, possibly in danger of my mortal life. This comes from a wrong reading of verses like this. Because when we go to the Aramaic, that word is believe, but the connotation is much different because the preposition in is not really there. Aramaic and prepositions have lots of different meanings depending on the context. And what Jesus was teaching was that if you believe me enough to do as I do and follow these teachings, then you will not remain in the darkness, but be in the light. I have come to teach these things. I have come into the world as a light to teach these teachings of how you do not have to remain in the darkness of separation. That you may make that connection and live in the light. And that brings me to this next verse. It's the same whether you look in King James or in Lamsa. I am the way, the truth, and the life. Jesus said to him, I am the way and the truth and the life. No man, no person comes to my Father except by me. Now that verse has been taken to mean that if you're not a Christian, then you are in danger of your immortal soul. But truth is absolute. There's only one truth. There's only one presence and one power in our life in the universe. That's God. God is good. That's not what Jesus was saying here. I am the way and the truth. In Aramaic, I can even remember the words, but I wrote them down just to make sure. And I'm probably going to massacre the pronunciation, but you've heard me talk about this light, this area being ruah. Okay, in one dialect it's ruah, in another dialect it's ruha. You know how in the South we say y'all, and it's really you all, right? So this is ruah or ruha. They add that extra H sound in there. You ruah deshrada. That word deshrada is the way. It's the path. Now, the other word. I'm going to get back to that deshrada word, okay? The other one is this I am. There is no being verb in Aramaic. So there's no way that Jesus said, I am. It's not possible. What Jesus said, that's recorded in the Gospel according to John, is Ina na. And another little concatenation, because what he says, Ina na means I. Ina is I. And then they kind of let that other I off. Ina na. There's a silent I there. Ina na. I. Well, what does that mean? It doesn't mean I am. Ina na, saying I. What could that possibly mean? I is when we make a connection between our separate self, our little self, and our big self, Ruah, Spirit. I is the connection that is between us and the light. When we can make that connection, the way becomes visible to us. Deshrada. The way, it's the road, the path. Deshrada is also the compass. It's the guide to follow the path. And even more, Ruah Deshrada. Ruah Deshrada, this path of light, the illuminated path, is the fuel we need to follow the path. It's all three of those things. It's the path, it's the compass, going into the silence, getting the guidance we need, and it's the fuel that we need to follow it. Life. Light and life. Well, why is it so hard? Why is it that we find ourselves at the beginning of our spiritual path in the darkness? When we're born, no, let me back up. Let me back up. Before we were even conceived, okay? We were pure light, essence. We were right here. And in the second that conception happens, we have a separate self. You see the separate self? It goes all the way up to the light. Just as the light never leaves us. You know, no matter how separate we feel, no matter how we've lost our way, that light is still with us. That's the Christ light. It's always in us. But as soon as conception happens, we begin to clothe ourselves in the lantern. That light's inside the lantern, and it's shining just as bright as ever. But the lantern begins to be clouded because stuff happens. We've got DNA. I was just listening to a news story on NPR or one of the public radio programs that they've got at WLRH talking about our DNA and how it carries more than just the blueprint for how our cells are supposed to grow. That we actually inherit from our ancestors an attitude. Yes. Boy, I could talk about that for a whole hour because there's so much. There's this movie that I watched that's good evidence for it. It was called Crow Killer. And I'm going to try and be brief about this because what Crow Killer was these people that put on these really ugly masks. And then they went out and made noise and scared the crows. Well, every time they would put on these masks and go out there, the crows would signal danger to each other. Okay? Easy enough. That makes sense. Now, they stopped wearing the masks and they stopped going out there. Years later, all of the crows now that knew about Crow Killer had passed away. But they had children out there in the same woods. Generations later, they put on the mask, the Crow Killer mask. And they went out in the woods, And as soon as they were seen, they didn't have to raise a ruckus. They didn't have to scare the crows. As soon as those masks were seen, these crows who had never met Crow Killer signaled danger. They knew. Now, how did they know that? How did they know that? DNA. It was passed along to them. They knew what Crow Killer was. So we've already started to cloud up the glass from our DNA even. That just brings us into a certain conscious state. Things happen as we grow up. Some of it's really good. I learned about the existence of the divine in me and the divine all around us from my mother. I had a little picture, it's probably about that big, and there was a little, I don't know if it was a boy or girl, it was so small, it doesn't matter. And there was an angel right there behind this little child. And Mother taught me how to pray and say my prayers. I still say that prayer every night. And I just add to it. I add my gratitude to it at the end. But I also learned some things that weren't so good. Or at least they were fine at the time. But as I grew older, they didn't serve me as well. It also clouded the glass. Some of it prevented me from shining my full light. Always clean your plate. Eat every bit of food that's on your plate. Well, that was maybe I needed to do that when Mother was putting my food out there, but when I go to a restaurant and they pile it on, maybe I don't need to eat all that much. I've got evidence. That's right. It's obvious. But at the same time, okay, now that reminds me of another thing. You know, when I look in the mirror, what do you see? Do you see your goodness? I don't always see my goodness. I might look and see my flaws. And so there's a mirror exercise you can do. Every time you look in the mirror, I am good. Right now, just the way I am. I am good right now, just the way I am. It's a challenge because we're so used to looking in the mirror and seeing our flaws. But it can turn that around. Help that light to shine through a little bit better. Clean a little bit of that gunk off of that mirror, off of that glass of that lantern. What happens as we're cleaning that gunk off that lantern? We're letting that light shine in. And that light banishes darkness. What happens when you walk into a dark room and you flip the light switch on? Immediately the darkness is gone. Immediately. It's gone. Darkness cannot survive in the light. Ina na. When we make that connection, we're shining that light. And we're able to see Deshrada, the illuminated path. Deshrada, the way and the truth and the life. The life. The life. That's all of those words are in Deshrada, okay? The way, the path, the road to follow, the truth, the compass, divine wisdom in us, the life, the energy we need to follow the path. All in that one word, Deshrada. I am. Could not have been said. Ina na. When we make that connection, whenever we allow Ruha to be the active voice in our consciousness. Boy, I wanted to talk about this line right here. You can see where the middle of the diamond is. There's a line there. You can imagine it. So we use this as a good model here. Maybe you've heard of above the line and below the line. I just shared a video on our Facebook page a really neat YouTube video about the characteristics of above the line and below the line. At any moment in time, we're going to find ourselves either above the line or below the line. The line's so thin, that you can't be sitting on the line. You have to be above or below it. But just how much? Okay. When we're below the line, we're in separate self. We're being defensive. That's where we experience shame. That's where we're the victim, or we're the villain, or we're the hero. The hero. He's the one who gets it all done, but it's still below the line. Defends his position as the hero, no matter what's going on. Now, so how do we get above the line, though? Well, as soon as we know we're below the line, we're automatically beginning to move and let the light in. It begins with our awareness that, oh, I'm below the line. The light starts to shine in, and we begin to lift ourselves up to a state where we're no longer the victim. We're no longer the villain or the hero. So we simply are. There's no judgment above the line. We take full responsibility for everything that's going on. We are above the line. It's not a blame game here. It simply is. We can accept anything that's going on for what it is. It just is. There's no judgment above the line. There's discernment to know our path. That's coming from on. That's coming from Ruah. That way and truth and life. And if you just walked in, you're going to have to ask me about what that I am means another time. But please do, because this quote right here, I am the way and the truth and the life, has been used and abused to bring people into a state of separation, when what Jesus intended all along when he said those words in Aramaic was for us to make a connection with the divine that's already here, our light. The divine that we were and still are. But it was pure before conception. And we came into this body.